I think you meant 5 minutes, right?
We are live.
Oh, okay, great.
Well, pop back up. There we are. Hi, I'm Andy Schmuckler. host of this podcast that we're going to discuss with a friend of mine here, Scott Loomis, the question, where is the international order heading? Scott and I have become friends over the course of almost 40 years because we're each married. The two women we're married to have been best friends for over 50 years. So I've had the pleasure of discovering that Scott is a thoughtful guy who's very well informed about what's going on the international scene, and we've enjoyed just the two of us talking about what's going on. And here we are to have a conversation, which I hope will be illuminating for anybody who happens to be tuning in. Scott, let me just start by asking you, how come you're so well informed about all this? And since when have you been paying attention to what's going on in this, international, global, intersocietal system that we call human civilization?
Okay. I love the way you ask these questions, Andy. It's funny, we were talking beforehand, and we probably got interested about the same time. I mean, I grew up in a very small rural part of California, but I was always fascinated when the newspaper came once a week or whenever it was, seeing the headlines and finding out that there was this war going on in the Suez Canal between England and so on. And of course, I grew up around a lot of World War II veterans who were still pretty young then. And that got me fascinated. And then as I went into, I think Vietnam came along and went to college and majored in international relations, went to the Peace Corps 50 some years ago. So my interest in
you majored in college in international relations.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, I didn't know that. Well, that pretty much explains. The twig was already bent.
Yeah, the seed had fallen in the ground, and being in Peace Corps during the Vietnam days, and then coming back and being pretty involved in international stuff, mostly in the health area initially, and then getting into national security and classified work, which we won't talk about, of course. And then later on doing international work for probably, 40, 50 years. I think I've worked in, I lost count, 50, 60, 70 countries, including particularly more recently working in conflict zones in Iraq and Afghanistan and Pakistan and Yemen.
It's interesting. It's interesting to contrast us in a way because I am not nearly so well traveled, except in my mind, because I've put myself into all these situations as a guy who asks questions about why are things the way they are, and you've been out there sort of at a very factual. Out there in Afghanistan, where that war has a very concrete reality that I'm seeing it in more, Cold War, conceptual, whatever framework. And here we are. So
yeah, it's one thing to talk about. The other thing is actually be writing an MRAP and wondering if you're going to get blown up. That's true.
But by the way, let me ask you. One of the questions in my mind is whether people listening to us, however many there may be, are thinking two old white guys, or even just the old. Forget the, whether they might think, why listen to some, old timers, what do you know? But it occurs to me that the fact that you and I have sort of ridden this historical time from the mid 50s or whatever to this moment with Ukraine, that gives us a perspective about, what are the issues at stake out here that I think that if you haven't paid a lot of attention over a long time, might not be as clear in your mind. The old guys might be able to see something more about the question of international order.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, if you talk to particularly some of my, I don't know, I don't want to call them out, but talk to people who are younger, they say, well, why should we listen to you? And you guys have messed up things anyway. Which, And it's hard to sometimes to answer that. But I think you're right. I mean, looking at the curve of history over the years, hopefully gives us some perspective. And I think being on the ground perhaps gives us another piece of data that others don't have. Who knows? I mean, I don't want to. I don't know where wisdom comes from exactly, but I do know that we both have our views that we feel pretty strongly about.
I think wisdom comes from clear thinking over time about a lot of stuff. and yeah. So where would you like to start our conversation if we don't regard it as already started?
Yeah, I think the question that I'm interested in hearing you talk about, and me too, is kind of how would you describe this moment in history? We've talked about the flow of history. Is this a and I think Secretary Austin used this term more recently in his speech in Singapore. He talked about this hinge point in history, and Biden has talked about an inflection point, and in talking about it both domestically but also internationally. And I'm wondering if you share that view and how you would describe what you see going on. I mean, you mentioned Ukraine, Gaza. I would also mention Myanmar. I would mention Sudan. I'd mention the Straits of Taiwan. What I mean, what's going on in history? Is this an unusual time, or is it kind of more something that happens every 20 or 25 years?
I think that there is something. I mean, I don't know about hinge or inflection point, but I would say crisis, which means a crossroads. The biggest uncertainty hanging over the international system right now is that the world's number one nation is at a crossroads. And when it comes to the question of international order, it really makes a difference about what this longtime leader of the free world will be on the world stage after this upcoming election. There are a lot of things going on, like Ukraine and stuff like that, but the real uncertainty right now is, will the United States be the leader of the free world? And that does involve thinking about the kinds of things you and I grew up with, where we were born into an America that had just defeated fascism. Without America, things would have gone a lot worse. And even with all of our faults, we also won the Cold War. And if the Stalinist regime had prevailed instead, that would have been an even bigger mess than the world is now. So even with all of our warts, there's something important for the world about the United States still being, to the extent that we are, on the side of better things than, say, the Nazi and Japanese regimes in World War II and the Soviet regime in the Cold War. That's what's at stake right now.
Well, I would agree with that. Although I would not underestimate what's going on in Russia nor in China. I mean, if things had gone differently in either of those two countries, what's going on in the United States might also be differently. There's some sort of impact.
Do you think there's any much? I mean, do you have a sense that we might get to a post-Putin Russia? I mean, he'll die eventually, but then so you will. Will you and I ever see Russia escape from under this fascist dictator? I was optimistic when his failure in Ukraine was becoming evident, but it seems like people are saying he's as well ensconced as ever.
Well, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, one can create a number of scenarios. I mean, the question I think that I would love to hear you talk about is what should between now and the election, and I totally agree with you, the election is going to be key, the election in the United States, what should the United States policy be with respect to Ukraine? Because clearly the Putin faction of the Republican Party has allowed Russia to gain some advantages. Should the United States be more aggressive in its policy? Should it allow and encourage things like the NATO trainers going into Western Ukraine? Should it allow further use of military means into Russia? What do you think about that thing? Because that has an impact.
I'm struck that you sort of combine the political problem in America regarding our role in Ukraine. I mean, ideally, the president of the United States would simply be able to judge what is the best thing to do for the country and then do it, which was the case up until the pro-Putin wing of the Republican Party blocked aid to Ukraine with major consequences on the battlefield.
Indeed.
Consequences that were all on Putin's behalf. So I have an answer for what American policy should be that isn't dependent on. The real issue is, I think we should do everything we can to support Ukraine and use prudence, and there are disagreements about what's prudence, to avoid getting into a direct confrontation with the superpower that you and I spent all of our upbringing years envisioning being in a nuclear war with us. So we take seriously that we did those drills out there in the school, putting our heads down by the lockers because the Soviets might explode a nuclear bomb within our vicinity, right? Didn't you go through that?
Yeah. I'm laughing because my classified work actually dealt that area in way more detail than I can go into.
So, I mean, I've disagreed with some people, and they might well be right. I felt like Biden was right to be cautious at first. I have a Republican friend out here who excoriates him for not giving him more quicker, and and this business about do we let the Ukrainians use our weapons against targets in Russia? That's a good question. It's starting to look like Putin, for all his saber rattling, is not going to be. He was bluffing, I think. So, and the Europeans have concluded. So, but the thing is, if we don't have a policy that's based on clear national interests and values, such as have motivated the United States at its best since we fought the Nazis, if we can't get that to maintain that role, and instead we get a government that's basically admires Putin because the new president of the United States admires people who take what they want without regard to the rules or the rule of law or international order or any of that stuff. That's my concern. But I do think that the Ukraine situation we could talk about apart from the United States problems.
Well, they're connected, obviously. But I'm curious. Say more about that. What should the U.S. policy be? What would success for that policy look like in Ukraine?
Okay, here are my criteria, and I don't know in what proportion. We want to protect. I think basically to punish aggression. When people get rewarded for behaving really badly, you get more bad behavior.
Right.
When people get punished for really bad behavior, you get less behavior. So discrediting Putin and even possibly driving him from power, because there's a historical pattern that Russian leaders that get humiliated on the international arena don't last very long. So making him fail. And there are all kinds of reasons that have to do with basic American values, basic Christian values, basic Judeo-Christian values, basic human values.
I would say even basic Islamic values.
Basic what?
Islamic values.
I'm not trained in knowing exactly what those values are.
If you talk to the people who really have studied Islam from other than just regurgitating it, they would say that.
Well, I am delighted. I like the idea that there is a basic moral and spiritual truth that people have done variations on. and don't always get entirely right, but that there's a common human valuing of treating other people decently.
So I mean, I'm curious with it. So go a little bit further with that, because helping Putin fail, what does that look like? Does that look like Ukraine regaining all this territory? Is it
Well,
simply
the
having a,
more the better. That's yeah. Cost benefit analysis. Is Crimea getting Crimea back a possibility? Yeah, I think that would help seal the deal for Putin if he isn't able to get Crimea. And I gather that the Ukrainians have managed to make the Russian hold on Crimea rather difficult right now.
yeah, they've been very successful in the Black Sea, and they have been able to attack Crimea, so that actually logistics across the Kerch Bridge has gone way down. They just can't do it. They have to use the land corridor. You're right.
But in terms of what should our policy be, I mean, that requires, I mean, if I were president, something I have fantasied about, since the second Eisenhower term, if I were president, I would be asking my national security team, including especially good analysts in the Pentagon, what are the possible scenarios here and what are the probabilities? So what is it worth trying to accomplish? If it's something's impossible, like getting all of Ukraine back, if they tell me, because of the way the Soviets or the Russians are dug in, it would be enormously costly to try to get that, okay, then you don't do it. But if they say, cost benefit wise, these are the things that are achievable, then that's what you try to achieve. But the important point is that at the end of the whole process, the democracy should have conquered over fascism. The adherence to basic international norms of conduct, like Europeans had been creating a zone of peace, really big achievement for humankind. And Putin just, shattered it. And reestablishing that as best we can by punishing the guy, by making it costly as hell for having violated it. That's how you create an international order of the kind that I've long been looking for.
So would the message to U.S. voters be stay the course? This may take years because Putin is in this for the long run. I don't know how long, but we're talking about multiple years because the Ukrainians, don't have the immediate manpower to do anything. They don't have the technology and the logistics strength to do anything in the short term, and not till next year at the earliest. So is this a message to us that we've got to stay in this perhaps for several years?
Let's look at what ultimately is being fought over here. It's a continuation of, you can make connections about this has been going on throughout history. And World War II and the Cold War were pretty clear enactments of a battle between democracy, where power comes from the bottom up, and there's at least a serious effort to make the human world better, versus fascism, in the form of the Japanese and what they did in China, that people still are traumatized by, and that the Germans did on the European continent when they went full out away from democracy and into this fascist monster of a regime. And Stalin, who starved out 3 million Ukrainians just to impose his will on them. Starved them to. You can look at this struggle, that what is at stake in Ukraine is the same thing that's at stake in the American election, which is, will the destructive forces prevail over the forces that at least are as good as we've been able to create for making things better?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. So I actually, in some ways, I think the Ukraine situation is more clear cut. less clear cut is what to do with respect to Israel and Gaza and Hamas.
Yeah,
And I'd like to have you here talk about that and kind of what should we be thinking there and what should we be doing there, because that's in some ways a more difficult moral question.
well, I've talked about this on my previous live streams. To me, the central thing is a couple of central things. It's really, really a shame for Israel and for the world that when all this happened with Hamas, the people in power were the people who are in power is in Israel, which is Netanyahu and a coalition that includes people who are basically fascistic and have been excluded from Israeli politics by every party until Netanyahu had to get them to hold on to power. And he's a sociopath willing to do whatever he needs to do for himself, even at the cost of his nation, because he wants to stay out of jail. We got a problem there, and his policies also have been problematic. So Hamas deliberately provokes Israel into doing what Netanyahu and his government willingly did, which is we got two essentially destructive powers escalating a very ugly war. So there's no good guy between Israeli policy and certainly Hamas what they did to provoke the Israelis is just unspeakable. So there's no, you would have wished that the average Israeli government would have been in power, that would have been capable of seeing that a trap had been set and wouldn't respond in this way does anybody really think that Israel has helped itself, its long-term prospects for survival in the Middle East? This is a great democratic country which already has a very splendid history, and they're making it less democratic, with this judicial overhaul. It's a very ugly thing, and the American policy was right at the beginning, but it was way too slow to distance itself once it became clear that Netanyahu was going to take things in a direction which was contrary to the interests of world peace, contrary to the interests of Israeli survival, and contrast to the interests of the United States and of Joe Biden seeking re-election. So he just took way too long.
Yeah.
That's
a couple of things I would add to that is I believe that Netanyahu clearly wants Biden to lose the election.
I agree.
Because he knows that will be in his favor. The other thing is that this action by the United States in response to the war has so turned off many Muslim Americans who had previously supported Biden. They may not vote for him, and that may make a difference in Michigan, for example.
Well, that's what I meant about the interests of Joe Biden.
Yeah, exactly.
This has hurt Biden, and in part that's not fair, but in part I think he mismanaged the process.
So what should he do now?
He's doing it. Well, I can't really. The problem with Biden is he doesn't play hardball readily enough. He's a wonderful guy. When I take it from what I've seen about his history and what Lindsey Graham said about him, that in the great mass of humanity, he's one of the, Lindsey Graham said he's as good a human being as God ever created, or something like that. So I would have loved for him to have been president at a time when, two guys with goodwill put their arm around each other and decide how to cooperate to get things done. That's not the Republican Party he happened to hit upon when he finally got to be president after trying and failing in 1988 and 2008. Here he is, an old man with a Republican Party that has gone over to the dark side and for whom the idea of cooperating is a cardinal sin.
Right, I agree with that. So the question is, if you're Biden, I mean, he's doing it now. He's put out this peace agreement that apparently has put
Right.
Netanyahu in a bit of a corner. But between now and say the next 2 or 3 months, if Biden is going to try and get some peace and also perhaps win back enough voters so that it becomes a non-issue in places like Michigan, what does he need to do more? Does he need to play hardball?
You know, it all hinges on this peace plan thing that Biden has made a strong move. I don't fully understand exactly what the strength of it was, but he's put Netanyahu on a spot, and Netanyahu is going to have to choose, according to some newspaper commentaries, between doing the things that Biden's pushing him to do, which I guess there's a lot of pressure for, and then risking that his fascist right will topple his government, which they're explicitly threatening to do. If I have difficulty being real optimistic that this is going to happen, but if it does happen, if there is a ceasefire, that will make a huge difference and take a lot of pressure off Biden. But a lot of damage has already been done. I don't know whether you can get the Arabs in Dearborn, Michigan, to think of Biden in a bigger way or a different way than they're thinking about him when he's been backing Netanyahu's assault on Gaza to the extent that he has.
Yeah, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to watch what happens because I think this may, the next couple of months, internationally anyway, unless something else dramatic happens, may be one of the pivot points. I wanted to bring up another. I mean, I agree with you.
May I add just one thing?
Yeah, sure.
I want to accentuate that the Ukraine thing that we were talking about with Putin and punishing him, and the Israeli-Gaza war is part of the same global struggle that's going on right now between sort of fascistic, authoritarian, and democratic. It's the same basic thing. You know, in this case, the issue is that the Israeli democracy has been losing ground for a long time now toward a fascist force. So that battle has been waged here, you know, like the hundreds of thousands in the streets of Tel Aviv saying, don't eliminate the independent judiciary. It's a fascistic move to undermine democracy. The outcome that should be sought is not just peace and feeding the Gazans and all that, but it's also getting rid of the fascistic power in Israel. That the Israeli people, the polls show clearly, if given a chance right now, they would sweep Netanyahu onto the ash heap of history and into court to be tried for the crimes he committed.
Well, I agree with that, but what I would add is it's probably just as important to create a little bit of a democratic possibility within the Palestinian state.
I agree. I heard once that there's somebody in an Israeli prison who somehow might be their Nehru or their Gandhi or their, Nelson Mandela, or, you might actually work with him to get to something good. Do you know any possibilities like that?
I don't know of any individuals, no. I mean, but I would not be surprised. First, because there's a lot of people in jail in Israel who probably shouldn't be there. So I think my guess is that some of those people have been identified by people who are more knowledgeable than we are. I mean, I don't know. I mean, in the best of all worlds, you would be right that there would be a permanent ceasefire. There would be some sort of joint governance of Gaza that would lead to a Palestinian state eventually that's more democratic, that there's a conversion in Israel towards a retreat from fascism towards a more democratic, pluralistic society. I hope that happens. I mean, in the next couple of months may determine whether that's even possible.
Let me say something I've never said publicly. I mean, I'm very much on the side of the Palestinians in the sense that I want them to have as much dignity and self-determination and all the good things that if you have goodwill, you want people to have. I don't want the Palestinians to be living under the kind of hostile regime that the Israelis have imposed upon them. At the same time, there are, it seems that the pictures we get of the political culture within the Palestinian world doesn't give you much sense that they're within easy striking distance of providing something decent to live next to. Hamas is one form that is taken, and we've seen what they've been willing to do. Islamic Jihad is another one, and the heirs of Yasser Arafat have not been very impressive about, give us a state, you'll find us a good neighbor.
Yeah, you may be right. I don't know enough about that. My belief, I have no data on this, is that within the Palestinian people and diaspora, that there are folks like that would be available, but I don't.
I feel sure that that's true.
Yeah.
It's all a matter of what has emerged out of this amorphous mass of all the people who regard themselves as Palestinians as the organizing powers. And when there's a struggle for power, it isn't always the best that come out on top. So I mean, one of my main points about civilizations got to do with that very point, that if there's anarchy in a way, it's warlords essentially who end up in control. And I point to Lebanon in the 70s and Somalia in the 90s to show that that's what happens. And so you need a process. And what I think that if there were an ideal Israeli government, what it would do would be to find the best people, use their creativity to generate a process, whatever that would be, working with those people to take however long it takes to get to where you need to get to.
Yeah.
It's not obvious how you get from the mess that we've gotten in Palestine after all these traumas. I mean, these are all people who have suffered at each other's hands. Not easy to deal with any of this stuff. But you can get a process, which is your best effort to build it. And if the Israeli government worked on that, I think it would take a generation at least to get to the point where you could say, okay, we've got the two states.
Oh, you're probably right about that. I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, I think for all the reasons you said, I would agree with it. We could talk about this for a while, but I wanted to bring up one more area of the world to have you talk about, because it's the one that people in the United States say is the greatest challenge to the United States, which is China, and what's going on in their view of the world. I mean, they're trying to remake the world order in their own image, and for their own, basically replace the United States and as the top dog, if you will, in the U.S. order, in the international order. And so my thought is, obviously around Taiwan, first, do you believe that China would either attack or blockade Taiwan? And if they did, what should we do? And I guess what should we do between now and the election? I don't think it's going to happen, but after the election, if Biden's the president or if Trump's the president, what will be the difference in how they deal with China and Taiwan?
Well, let me say, in a sense, right before I get to what should we do, at the moment, I think that we do nothing except for continue to prepare for potential military conflict and hope that this is simply not a threat that's going to materialize. And that, if I were president, again, going back to my old fantasy, Um, I,
Partly
I
for
would
the world.
I would ask my China experts, I don't at the State Department or at the CIA, and maybe people from the private sector, you know, how much how much of what this Chinese regime threat to Taiwan, just to is it should it be taken seriously, or is this because unlike Putin, who has seized property, seized sovereign territory by force now, uh, the Chinese have seemed to me to be definitely interested in getting a Chinese hegemony, if that's the right way to say the word. They are a rising power. There has been an aggressiveness about them, like the way they're sort of elbowing their way into the South China Sea. But it's all been very, very cautious. Not since they had a brief little war with the victorious North Koreans right after we lost the Vietnam War. I can't remember that the Chinese have had any other real military conflict. I know there's been some confrontations in which maybe dozens got killed with India in some of the Himalayan regions that are disputed. So it's not like they haven't given signs of potential aggressiveness, but are they really might they really invade Taiwan in spite of the potential ramifications of that? Is there enough to gain to risk, going to war with the United States? And who knows what happens when that happens? And from the point of view of the United States, by the way, I think you and I have talked about this. Some of the people who've gamed this out don't say the war goes all that well for the United States.
No. I mean, you're right. The gaming has indicated the United States would lose pretty quickly after about 3 days when our ammunition runs out, which is one of the things the Ukraine war has demonstrated, that we have basically set ourselves up with the industrial base of only conducting a war for 4 or 5 days and then we're out of ammunition. And the question is, will they? I would perhaps disagree on how much aggressiveness the Chinese, I think, have shown, because I think it's gotten more aggressive in recent years. I think the likelihood of a direct attack is less, but I think a blockade is possible, and that requires a more cautious approach by the United States. The blockade, huh?
I know you weren't paying attention in 1948 when we had the Berlin airlift. It's a rather famous episode in history when the Soviets tried to cut off Berlin to squeeze it to death. But they could shoot down planes.
Oh yeah.
The Russians could have shot down planes, and they chose not to. So, there are a lot of scenarios, and Biden took what used to be called strategic ambiguity, like giving us maybe we would do something militarily to defend Taiwan, but we haven't made any such commitment. Biden has changed that. He's basically said that we would defend Taiwan if it were attacked. I kind of like him to be tough, but was that a smart move on his part?
Well, there was a great debate about that. I mean, the issue that a lot of military people look at is what if China invades Taiwan, but it doesn't try to engage the U.S. forces, doesn't attack Guam, doesn't attack U.S. ships? Would we come to his aid? Now, it's obviously a different story if all of a sudden Guam
Biden has said that we would.
Yeah, I know he said that. But it's one thing to say it, then all of a sudden just see hundreds of airplanes and dozens of ships coming towards Taiwan. We'll see. My question, and I have a hypothesis, is let's say, unfortunately, that Trump gets elected. My hypothesis is if there's an attack or a blockade against Taiwan, I don't believe Trump will do anything. I think he'll back away.
Well, two things come to my mind. I think I agree with you. There's a side of Trump that wants to be the tough guy. And if he were to feel that he was getting, it was a slap in his face,
Yeah.
if he experienced it that way, which I could imagine he might, but then he might feel, like hit back 10 times harder, is his motto. Not turn the other cheek, he's explicit about that. So, but I think you're probably right that he's spoken about Xi, and he's spoken about the Mr. Rocket Man in North Korea and his buddy Putin in Russia. He admires people who flex their muscles and knock their opponents down. So he might, I think, very well think that Xi had just shown himself to be an admirable character who knows how to take what he wants.
I agree with that, and I think if Xi is smart, and I believe he is, he would simply say to Trump, look, we're going to take over Taiwan, but we're going to really provide lots of opportunities for you and other capitalists to put your money into Taiwan. Don't worry about that. We're going to really make things better for you guys.
Yeah. Well, in terms of the overall, where is the international order heading? In addition to this question about, it would be a really terrible thing if we got into a war between the United States and China. So one hopes that can be avoided. But the other thing that I think is at stake for humankind is, can China, a rising power, be brought into the world to play a constructive role in building the kind of civilization we want to have, which is the destructive versus constructive. So a power that would feel so impassioned about its we're the Middle Kingdom. We cannot tolerate there being a part of what we consider to be our territory being controlled by not us, but by this group on Taiwan. Well, China has its history, and Taiwan has become something admirable. A decent human order would have a China that says, well, you don't always control everything, and we can live with this thing. It's a good thing, and it's better than trying to undo history by force.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting thing, and I know we need to wrap up our time here soon because I want to give you time to talk about some of the other topics you have on your agenda. But China is facing a big dilemma demographically. And I saw in The Economist, I think it was in The Economist, that if things do not change between now and the end of the century, that the population will be cut in half. The replacement rate is so low, and the population is so old that by the year 2100, it'll be 500 million people.
So few.
So yeah, well, compare. I mean, down from 1.3 billion.
April, my wife, whom you know,
I know her, yeah.
is working on a piece about how the alarmism about declining population is way excessive. And I'm inclined to believe that that's true. Not that there aren't challenges that need to get met. But it doesn't, I don't think, has to be a disaster. I mean, China's population is already declining. The demographers believe, I think, that we're going to peak as a species at 9 billion and then retreat back to I don't remember what the number is, but, many fewer than at the peak. And I think that that's probably a transition that human civilization should endeavor to accomplish, because we our impact on the planet can be proportional and problematic in proportion to the number of people we have here.
Well, I agree with that, and I would be interested to talk to April about this point because the demographers are pretty clear about it.
She agrees that the population is falling. It's just a question of is that a disaster or a move in the right direction?
Well, that's a good question. It'd be interesting to explore that, and I think the economists would weigh in on in terms of how the different capitalist economies work. But I really do want to close out here because I'm looking at the time, and I'm aware that some of your listeners may want to hear you talk about some of the other topics. What I would say, and I think you would say this, is that clearly, if there's a hinge in history, it's the U.S. election in November, and that one of your messages to your public, which I agree with, and certainly all my friends agree with, is it's important to vote for Biden. Quite frankly, vote for Democrats up and down the line to avoid the worst case scenarios, because the challenges are going to be immense no matter what, and the United States is in a position, hopefully, to do the right kinds of things in the post-election world. And I assume you agree with that.
Yeah, I think that. I mean, I write op-eds that appear every week in this very Trumpian area, and I'm trying to talk to good conservative patriots that live in the Shenandoah Valley to think about the importance and value for American patriotism of the role that we've played as leader of the free world. The leader of the free world was shown, for example, when Biden did actually a splendid job of bringing the West, NATO and all, together to
Ukraine. Yeah.
when even before the invasion, doing actually a very splendid job as leader of the free world. It was one of the best performances I've ever seen. But we used to have two parties that plausibly could try out for the part of being the leader of the free world. And Republican Party of Ronald Reagan certainly qualified. The Democratic Party of FDR certainly qualified. But this Republican Party and this Republican leader have clearly shown that they've got a very different role in mind. And so I'm hoping that the conservatives that I live among, who regard themselves as patriots and took pride in America's role in the world, will see that they have to reject Trump and vote for Biden.
Yeah, I would agree with that because I think that the U.S. role in the world, if Trump gets elected, basically the American empire is over, and we're moving into a multi-regional, multipolar world that will be full of danger. I agree with you.
And it hurts me to read about how our traditional friends are very stressed out about the fact that we might go the wrong way in this election. And they've depended on the United States for a fair amount, not only sort of like leading the team, but also because the United States military has been such an important guarantor of their security since the beginnings of the Cold War. And even now, when Trump is saying he would tell Putin under certain circumstances, help yourself to our NATO allies.
Do whatever the hell you want, I think was the phrase.
Yeah, and you know that's. I hate to think that the people who are proud of the role we played back in those earlier eras could possibly vote for us to be aligned with the kind of people that we used to fight wars against.
Right. Well, and I think yes. On that note, and also knowing that I think for your next podcast will be the 80th anniversary of D-Day. Which you might want to keep in mind.
Thank you.
That it's been a great. I mean, we'll talk about this for a long time, but I really want to pause and say thanks for inviting me to have this conversation with you, and give you a chance to talk about a couple of the other things I know you had on your agenda. I think you wanted to talk about the Supreme Court decisions or potential decisions about immunity and so on.
Yeah. All right. Well, Scott, I'm really enjoyed having this conversation. Very much appreciate the pitches you throw. You know.
I didn't even throw the screwball. I only threw a couple of curves.
Yeah, but it was the spitter that I most admired.
Right.
Yeah, well, yeah, we're a nation of cheaters now. So,
Oh my. Yeah. All right. Well, good
and
luck.
I'd love to do this again sometime, and I'm grateful that you came.
You're quite welcome. Yeah. Anyway, you can sign me off however you do that and go on.
All right. Thanks
All right.
a lot.
Take
Bye
care.
bye. Well, we do have some other topics that we're going to get to, but I'm not sure I can put those up. I got to do a couple of engineering things here. Some of the other topics. One of the topics I wanted to talk about has to do with the Supreme Court and the case that they've been sitting on. The appeal from Trump about his claim that there's presidential immunity that means he can't be prosecuted for any of the things in the Jack Smith's indictments of him regarding January 6th, or be prosecuted for any of the indictments down in Mar-a-Lago. I guess it's the same claim, and it's a ridiculous claim. I mean, everybody who knows anything that I've heard, and I've heard a fair amount, says, "Oh, it's just completely contrary to everything about what the Constitution means." But the Supreme Court has been sitting on this case for months and months, one way and another. But I thought that after they delayed things like this, that everybody was still saying that, of course, the Supreme Court won't grant him presidential immunity. The principle that the president can commit crimes while he's president and never be held to account is just way contrary to the Constitution. And why would the Supreme Court want to put that out there? But I've been troubled lately that I see things like headings of opinion pieces. I gather that there are a lot of people who seem to be smart and thoughtful to some degree or another, who think that the Supreme Court really is about to confer major immunity like Trump has been demanding. And I don't know did I miss something? If I missed something, what happened to make you think that the court would? I'll tell you, unless I missed something, I don't think the court will. What the court wants is for Trump to win the election. I mean, the majority on the court is willing to prostitute itself, violate its proper role as interpreter of the Constitution, enough to delay the trial so that Trump is able to go into the election without people having seen everything a trial would have exposed. That would have hurt Trump. So they've given him de facto immunity by delaying things so long that the trial won't happen in time to block him from the presidency. But they got no need to change the basic understanding of the president and the rule of law. They got no reason. They're not pro-Trump. They're just in favor of Trump's winning this election, which would be good for the plutocracy that put them on the bench, better than Biden. So therefore, they help Trump. But they're not. They're playing a long game, and the plutocracy is playing a long game, and there's nothing to be gained by making the presidency above the law. What good would that be for the Supreme Court that gets to wield the law as their form of power? No, I don't think so, but maybe I missed something. So I'm just curious. Why are people suddenly talking about the court actually giving Trump the immunity he's asked for? Doesn't look that way to me. Okay. There's another thing that I want to address. It's got to do with the immediate events at the center of the drama in the last week, which is that Trump got convicted of 34 felonies by a group of average Americans who heard weeks of testimony and concluded unanimously that beyond a reasonable doubt, Trump was guilty. That was one big development. Did not surprise me. I think that if he could have any of these trials conducted in an honest way, that would be the outcome. But then the second thing that happened was that the leaders of the Republican Party came to Trump's vociferous defense by attacking the whole system of justice that had brought about this result, attacking the judge, attacking the prosecution, regarding the whole thing as a travesty of the worst kind. I think that we know, by the way, that the Republicans are aware that the Republicans who are out there speaking, like the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, who talked about this as a disgraceful day in American history and a purely political, the weaponization of American justice. I believe that we know that he knows better. But it sure is important for the American people to know better. And so I've written an op-ed piece, which will be my message to the conservatives of the area where the congressional district where I ran for Congress 12 years ago, an area that's practically 70% Republican, much of it rural, much of it traditional, a real piece of conservative America, which happens to be the part that I'm able to send messages to. And this piece is called, just look at the expletive evidence, exclamation point. Like a cartoon character's swear words when he hits his thumbs. That's what I did. Look at the expletive evidence. And then the first section of the op-ed piece is titled "A Disgraceful Attack on the Rule of Law." It should be obvious to every American who gives the evidence the least bit of thought that the response of many Republican leaders to Trump's conviction was an outright attack on the rule of law. Sham? Witch hunt? Weaponization of our legal system? All the evidence points the other way. I'd be less disturbed if they'd come out and honestly declare that they support the criminal against the proper workings of the American system of justice. but no one should believe their lies, so obviously contrary to the facts. A jury, 12 average Americans, listened to weeks of testimony and concluded unanimously that beyond a reasonable doubt, Trump was guilty as charged. Why think these verdicts must be some travesty, especially in view of the sprawling pattern emerging from diverse, legitimate legal processes of Trump's criminality? And then I got bullet points. A court in Colorado determined that Trump was indeed an insurrectionist. A grand jury in Georgia found that Trump and others were guilty of conspiracy to overturn the 2020 election results in Georgia. A jury of average Americans in a civil case in New York found that Trump was guilty of sexually assaulting and then defaming a woman, E. Jean Carroll. A legal proceeding has found that Trump's organization had been guilty of widespread financial fraud. A judge in California said it was more probable than not that Trump was guilty of crimes related to the attempt to overturn the 2020 election. Add to that all of Trump's attempts to delay his trials past the election, which amounts to a virtual confession. If he were innocent, would he not be eager to show his innocence to voters before the election? Add also how the speaking indictments in the other delayed trials, in those other delayed I've got to polish this thing, present such powerful evidence of Trump's guilt. Especially the case in Florida on the charges regarding Trump's endangering national security with his theft and mishandling of classified documents, and widely considered a slam dunk for conviction. There's absolutely no reason to think juries in the other cases would be less likely to convict than the jury that just found Trump guilty on all counts. And the evidence shows that Biden's Department of Justice, far from weaponizing the law, bent over backwards, even excessively, to avoid having to confront Donald Trump. All the evidence supports the supposition that last week's guilty verdicts for the crimes that sent Trump's fixer to jail was American justice in action. No evidence supports the Republican leader's scandalous pretense that the trial and verdict made Trump the victim of injustice. Honest Republicans should be asking, what should an American think of a party, from its chosen Speaker of the House on down, that rallies to support the man with such a trail of criminality by attacking the American system of justice that all the evidence shows about this case has functioned exactly as it is supposed to? How should an American patriot feel about a party that sides with the criminal in the war he's waging against the rule of law? I think I'm going to get rid of one of those sentences. All right, that's the conclusion of the first part of that piece. This is sort of a separate issue, but it's part of the same post-verdict set of thinking. And it's called "The Nixon Has Suffered Enough Mistake." When Trump comes up for sentencing, what sentence would be appropriate? That question reminds me of how wrong-headed I thought President Ford was when he declared, while pardoning his predecessor, Richard Nixon, "Nixon has suffered enough." The idea was that the humiliation and loss Nixon had experienced by being exposed as a criminal and driven from office was sufficient, and he should be spared any further ordeal. That idea offended me. I don't know how much suffering society should inflict on criminals in general as punishment for their crimes. The main criterion for a good policy of punishment, I think, is what will best serve to make us the best society we can be. But whatever the level or kinds of suffering appropriate for punishing crimes, the idea that we should go easier on a president that commits crimes than on other criminals has it backwards. What sense does it make to punish more harshly those criminals born into disadvantageous circumstances, like some guy who might hold up a 7-Eleven, than someone who has enjoyed the greatest privileges the nation can bestow? Why should those whose lives were more afflicted with suffering all along have to suffer more with prison time, while a president who commits crimes is judged to have suffered enough simply by his having his special status revoked? And there's another thing. While society has a real interest in discouraging crimes like armed robbery, hugely greater is the national interest in deterring presidents from using their enormous powers in criminal ways. I don't know what sentence Trump should be given, but as I see it, his place in America, like Nixon's a half century ago, is a reason for him to be, if anything, tougher on him than if he were just some random citizen. And as for the idea that serious punishment would anger Trump's supporters, I say that the defenders of the rule of law have had an inescapable battle forced upon them. The question isn't whether to get into the battle. It is on what terrain the battle is to be waged. And I think as good a battle as any is dealing with Trump's criminality and attacking the Republicans' disgraceful choice to support the criminal and attack the basic American value that no one is above the law. An issue has arisen in the democratic world about whether the Democratic side is rising sufficiently to battle against what the Republicans have lately done, like the garbage that Mike Johnson is putting out. And I gather even Susan Collins and Mitt Romney have rallied on this. This is not the proper way to hold Trump accountable. I would say it's significantly more appropriate as a way of holding Trump accountable as the tax evasion laws that Al Capone broke turned out to be the way that the federal government held Al Capone accountable. Because this did show a lot of what American citizens should not be embracing in choosing a president, including all the cheating that's revealed in this trial. And the Democrats really, I think, should be, and not just the Democrats, anybody who wants the rule of law to prevail in this attack that the Republicans have launched on it, should be pressing the battle. This piece that I just read it's my attempt to press that. I also have one other channel that's sort of a back channel thing that actually could lead to something happening in the democratic world. I don't have any reply yet on whether that suggestion of vigorously pressing the battle on this very set of issues that constitute a battle between a force that's taken over the right, which is waging war against the American system of justice, and those of us who care about preserving American democracy. We have always, on that good side, fallen short of what I think would be the proper level of pressing the battle. And this is the latest version of it, the response to Trump's verdict of guilty. I would have loved to have had the Democrats right there at the very beginning, calling people out on, in the way that I just did, as vigorously as possible. I'd like to see a really good Democratic spokesman like Adam Schiff or Jamie Raskin or Elizabeth Warren go on Fox News, the way, what's his name, Gavin Newsom went to Fox News to debate DeSantis, to get in front of that audience and go toe to toe, mano a mano, on the question of how people should regard what the jury just delivered, what it shows us about what's true about Trump and about the American judicial system. That Trump has been a criminal and the judicial system has worked the way it's supposed to work. And to have at the same time, to expose what the Republicans have become as they become the Trump party, a party that's allied themselves with somebody who's been committing crimes and is now continuing to wage war against the rule of the people. And maybe it should be a debate format, like Gavin Newsom had that toe-to-toe with DeSantis, and I think, gather he cleaned his clock. I think either of any of those people could go toe-to-toe with Mark Johnson, challenge him to defend what he said, and even if properly issued a challenge that somebody walks away from, you win that way too, because they have walked away from a challenge and it's dishonorable. So go in front of a Fox News audience and expose what Mark Johnson was doing that I assume he must know better than to do. So. But I was pleased that by the next day, Biden was out there saying something which was countering it. And I don't think that the main thing should fall to Biden right away. I think the defenders of the rule of law should be leading the charge at first, and then as the campaign heats up, and maybe on the debate stage, Biden can be ready to say what people should understand, both about what the legitimacy of the process that American justice has just, and the illegitimacy of what Trump has been doing and what he's threatening to do if he becomes president to corrupt the rule of law, and what Mark Johnson has done. I'd love to see them clean his clock, the Gavin Newsom did with DeSantis. They're smarter, and they've got the truth on their side. I think that combination gives you a real good chance. So that's one of the things I wanted to talk about here. There's a piece that I wrote. It was going to be for this week because it used Memorial Day as a jumping off point, and Memorial Day, of course, was like a week ago, and so people move on, and nonetheless, I'm going to put this in the queue to run as soon as possible after the one about the verdict runs. The Memorial Day is something that I seized upon because when I write my op-eds, I'm often thinking about the people, conservative people of the area where my pieces run in the Virginia's 6th, the Shenandoah Valley, and out toward to embrace Lynchburg, a very conservative 2-to-1, 70%, 30 Republican area, and very traditionalist, and the kind of people who value something like Memorial Day as a moral and spiritual occasion about our fallen soldiers, much more than a liberal area would do so. The people that I knew inside the Washington Beltway, almost all of whom would vote Democratic, would not be thinking about the fallen dead on Memorial Day nearly so much as I can assume that my neighbors, a good proportion of them, will give some thought to it in the course of the weekend. And I have a Republican friend in particular who's very much into such things, and actually emailed me to say that he was going to attend a couple of Memorial Day observances in our region. I mean, it would never occur to me to go to such an event. I mean, I'm not a person who generally goes to events, but this is a guy who retired from the Navy at a pretty high rank, and and who lost friends in the Pentagon when it was hit on 9/11. This is meaningful to him. I think he served out there in the Navy in those waters where an American warship, the Cole, was attacked. I'm not sure where he was at that time, but some people were killed by that kind of thing. So I'm aware that the culture that I'm living in is a place whose patriotism is tied in with the kinds of feelings that Memorial Day honors. So this is all legitimate, but it's also geared toward pulling in my conservative readers by something I know matters to them. So here goes. I observed this Memorial Day by thinking about those members of the greatest generation who fought and won World War II. Especially those who gave their lives to defeat the fascist forces of Nazi Germany and the cruel conquerors from Japan. Millions of Americans in the military endured so much, and hundreds of thousands forfeited the chance to live out their full lives in order to defeat those enemies. How are we to understand what those Americans died for? It's more than just being for one's country in the same way we might want our side to be the victors because we identify with the NFL team that resides in our region. More admirable is the idea that one protects one's land and people from an enemy. That has been part of the ethos of human society since the beginnings of civilization. But when one looks at the history of our America, there's always been something more, something special, even sacred. That's part of how we understand what our nation fights for. America's special quality as a democratic society. The land of the free, which flourishes by giving people their liberty. That was especially true about World War II, as they led the fight against enemy regimes that operated in complete violation of the basic values that inspired our founders to create the American Republic. FDR and Churchill define the meaning of that war in such terms. And that same moral spirit was deeply embedded in the dozens of movies made in America during World War II. Our boys were fighting for decency and for the rights of people to form the government of their choice. When Lincoln spoke of what those soldiers died for at Gettysburg, when he resolved that these honored dead shall not have died in vain, he described that purpose as being that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. American democracy. So when I think of the sacrifice of the people we honor on Memorial Day, I think of them as having died to protect what's special and sacred about America, the nation the world has long honored for our breakthrough to democracy, the nation that the French celebrated by giving us that fabulous gift, the Statue of Liberty, the America that saved the world from fascism in World War II. Here I make a big shift. I close the trap that I've set for my conservative readers. It's kind of abrupt. I don't know if it's too abrupt. It is disturbing to think of all of those Americans out there today who think that they're honoring our fallen dead, yet are planning to vote for something that's deeply akin to that fascistic form of government those Americans sacrificed their lives to defeat. Ben Franklin famously said of what our founders gave us, a republic, if you can keep it. Keeping it turns out not to be as automatic as I used to think. Apparently, if things go somehow wrong, you can lose it. A friend of mine recently said about this political moment, I used to think, we're better than that. He was talking about the possibility that the American people might actually choose to move toward an authoritarian, fascist, strongman, dictatorial form of government. He and I agreed that we used to be, but now maybe we're not. That's what the polls suggest. There's a real chance that the American electorate will choose to give the powers of the presidency to a leader that has declared openly his intention to sweep aside the system of American government, of the rule of law, of checks and balances, for another setup where the leader can wield power arbitrarily. When it comes to the choice between Putin's Russia and the democratic Ukraine that Putin invaded, we know which side FDR and Churchill would support, and other democratic nations with them. But millions of Americans, even while thinking patriotic thoughts on Memorial Day, are planning to vote for a leader who clearly sides with the fascist dictator in Russia, whose tyranny over his people and aggression against neighbors resembles those of the Nazis, and whose war crimes are like those of the Japanese aggressors in Asia. Something seems amiss when people who honor those who died to keep the government by and for the people from perishing from the earth are planning to vote for a leader who claims to be above the law. We can now see that defending America entails not only battles against external enemies. Now it's a domestic political battle that's fought out through elections, where victory requires enlisting the support of the American people. Our founders foresaw that both kinds of battles needed to be fought. As we can tell from the oath they required all those who serve in the people's government to take. to protect and defend the Constitution, quote, against enemies foreign and domestic. Those founders knew that the Constitution was the heart and essence of the nation, hence the oath. So fighting to defend the heart and soul of America in our times requires defeating at the ballot box the leader and the party that does his bidding, who is not even trying to hide his intention to dismantle America's constitutional order. It dishonors our fallen dead, who died not for a flag, but for America's core values, to give support to a domestic enemy of the sacred spirit of democracy, for which so many have fought and died. I got some proofreading to do on that piece, but I really do think that that there's a warped kind of patriotism out there that gets people to think of things in terms of the flag and not the republic for which it stands. Republic that we've got as our a gift to which most Americans through the generations have owed a great deal. Life of most Americans in this constitutional democracy has been a better place to been a better life. It's been a better place to live than for the average citizen of a fascist state. If we look, there's an ugliness of spirit, even for those people who have the good fortune not to be victimized by the power that's placed itself above any obligations to anything but its own desires. Even if they're spared, they're not the ones sent off to concentration camps. There's an ugliness to that world. The human spirit is taking a dark form. The society is pervaded by something that whether it's Putin's Russia, where Navalny dies in prison, or Hitler's Germany, where perfectly innocent, decent people are rounded up and sent to camps. It's not where the human spirit flourishes. I often think that one of the mistakes that people seem to make is to think that the fascist power that enlists their support by attacking their enemies isn't doing that for any reason that means that they're going to look out for your well-being any longer than it serves their purpose to do so. And a force that's kind of insatiable about its desire for power and self-assertion and stuff like fascist regimes tend to be, is not going to indefinitely find that the people who help them early on are people they want to continue to do okay by. It's not really in anybody's self-interest to feed the crocodile just because it's going to eat them last. That's how I see it. Now, it may be that I'm misreading, like if the Trump party that has been emerging over the last generation and brings us Trump and may give us another Trump presidency that will transform a lot of things. Maybe that order that they create in America will be just fine for the people who are supporting it now. But I actually think that there's something inherently true, that brokenness begets brokenness, and that the broken spirit that drives people to want to be leaders of destructive cults, and that want to be unaccountable to any rule of law, any rules at all, that they're free to act on all their impulses. They tend to have lousy impulses, impulses of brokenness. Cult leaders are not generally the best human beings. I'd like to understand that picture a little bit more fully than I do. To want people to treat you as if it were true that you alone can fix it. To want people to greet themselves by "Heil your name." What kind of person wants that kind of thing? So I think that there is something that's broken at the very heart of fascism, and of the people who lead it. And then there's a way in which there's the question of how do they connect with, what is it that makes people choose to form that cult-like relationship, which is inherently got some brokenness at the foundation of it. Why do people want to treat another human being in that way? And people wrote about that kind of thing in the wake of World War II. But I'm still asking the question, and because I've had a chance to witness firsthand over the last generation a lot of really good people get swept up into something that's quite palpably not aligned with their very good values, and that performs a destructive role in the world. And it's a great struggle to understand. And I believe that one of the great tasks that awaits us as Americans in this era is to make contact with the goodness of all those people who are, in so many ways, in so many arenas, such good people, and do whatever is effective in making sure that whatever brought them into supporting brokenness in their political lives, that instead they are governed by the goodwill that they bring to their lives in a neighborhood or a church. There's no reason why we Americans on both sides of the divide should not be coming together to find out what good we can accomplish together based on the values we share. Because we do that in lots of ways outside the political arena. Two questions. How did people get led into being something that's not consistent with the person that they are in the non-political arena? And how do you get people so that instead of where power is concerned, they side with brokenness, to a place where power is concerned, they are willing to join hands to see how much wholeness we can create together? It's a very fundamental human issue. And if you believe in the New Testament and the teachings of Jesus about love thy neighbor as thyself and do unto others and stuff like that. All you got to do in the political realm is to go along with what the angels announced when Jesus was born, the peace on earth and goodwill toward men. Just go into the power system inspired by those two things. And there's no reason not to be dealing with each other across the divide that way, except that there's a force that's sort of grabbed hold of a lot of people, so that when they look at me or my wife, and we're really pretty decent people, likable if you meet us, they're going to have their vision of us as political actors, not as intelligent people who are doing really as much as we can to understand what would be good for the world and speaking in good faith. And, they don't see us that way. They had the Republicans in the Shenandoah County, where I live, at the county fair, and when the two parties had booths facing each other, the Republicans unfurled a big banner, basically, I don't remember the wording, but basically saying that the opposing party, the Democratic Party, is a party of baby killers. That's what they see. That's not a very good way of understanding the people I know on the liberal side of the divide. And even if it were, Jesus says, love thine enemies. If you're going to be a Christian, and here in the Shenandoah Valley, there are a whole lot of people who, to whom the idea that they are Christian is quite central. They believe that. If you want to be a Christian, even if we were baby killers, and you find some way to create the betterness that following all of Jesus' teachings is a great recipe for the world. Instead of conflict, can we find some good way to cooperate? I mean, FDR and Churchill cooperated with Stalin. Surely you can cooperate with Democrats if something good is and important is that needs to be achieved can be achieved. And actually, if you work in that cooperative spirit, you'll find out we're not really unreasonable at all. If people talk about the like the left wing agenda, oh my God, how weird that is if you look at the wider world. I don't think there was. When Barack Obama passed Obamacare, he didn't do anything the least bit lefty, extreme. If you judge what's extreme by what other countries like us, free societies with educated populations and basically good values, even with Obamacare, we were a laggard in terms of providing what every other society said that a citizen should get, which is security around the issue of healthcare. But the Russians, the Republicans acted as if what Barack Obama had done, death panels and socialism and all that kind of stuff. It was a cautious step in an important and very necessary direction. It just, so much of what's been going on is so obviously unacceptable what the Republican Party has been doing. And I had 10 years of talking to some very intelligent conservatives on my talk radio show about a lot of things. And their intelligence should lead them to conclusions that they don't come to on all kinds of things, including, as I wrote at the time, again and again. Well, not again and again and again. But what the Republicans did about Obamacare, I mean, if you just laid it out and described, some of the history and the nature of the issue and the election and the platforms and the process and what was passed and how it fits with, with the whole world's judgment about what kind of thing is appropriate. We had gone through everything as a democracy is supposed to go through and had settled an issue that clearly needed progress to be made on. And we had done what was possible to do. And the result was, this is it. And then the Republicans insist on repealing and repealing and repealing and trying to repeal, instead of saying, okay, we went through the process that the Constitution indicates we should go through, and we got to make a big national decision. And this is the outcome. I mean, sometimes you don't get everything the way you want. I mean, we all got to live with some stuff. Some people didn't like living with the Miranda decision. But this is what we did. This is how we did everything the system was designed to do, and this was the result. And we move on together, make it work as well as possible. That's what any decent American political party would have concluded, and they didn't. And they didn't lose the support of a lot of intelligent people by behaving the way they did the whole process. Nothing defensible about it. It was just right out there in the open. That's not what you want an opposition party to be doing. No, sit at the table. If there's anything about this proposal that could be improved, if you, as conservatives, know something better to do, put it on the table. Let's have a national conversation to see who the people's representatives, what decision they can make that they can implement something that needs to be done because, hey, the evidence suggests that we're losing, 50,000 American lives every year that unnecessarily because we failed to get the more universal coverage like every other democracy does. And we're spending, if you look at what we're spending on healthcare compared to other people who are getting better system, we're spending twice as much as they are. We're wasting $1 trillion a year, or was it more? 1.3, was it? Obviously need to do something. So what is it? My mission in life has been a seeker of the truth, trying to get to understanding, and then a teller of truth, and any kind of, with whatever platform I can get to come up with conclusions that are worth imparting to people. So the truth is just a huge deal to me. And when I think about the people I talked with who showed intelligence when we talked about the questions of meaning and value that we face in our lives, which is what I did on the radio. And then I see them follow the Republican Party as it deals with this crucial national issue, which we already had a history back in Clinton's time of trying and failing to solve a problem that was really running roughshod over the national budget because of the way healthcare costs were climbing. And I didn't understand. How do you get intelligent people to get on board with something which is palpably doing the wrong thing, indefensible? And here we are later with a Republican Party that went up and did that denigration of the American system of justice, which as I understand it, it was like exemplary process of justice, that the judge presided in an even-handed and very admirable way, according to people with lots of court experience, that the prosecution laid out its case masterfully, that the jury was well constituted and did what a jury's supposed to do. History is going to judge based on the evidence, the clear evidence, that the rule of law acquitted itself admirably. Yet the political party of my Republican neighbors has sided with the criminal, in spite of all that evidence that, yeah, Trump really is a criminal. There's no reason to think that he wouldn't be convicted of all these crimes that he's been doing everything he could to prevent from occurring before the election. I mean, all of this stuff is obvious. You know, it blows my mind. But whatever it is that's happened to a lot of good and intelligent people, if we want to have a healthy democracy sometime down the line, we got to retrieve those good people. We can't let whatever it is that happened that sort of hoist them by whatever was broken in them that made them vulnerable to being put into this state of consciousness, whatever it is, in their political lives. That goodness that they've schlepped across the teeter-totter onto the side of brokenness in their political lives, we got to bring it back somehow. I would be very proud if somebody published a book of Schmuckler's best messages to the conservatives, 2013 to 2024. You know, I've written hundreds and hundreds of pieces that I am in fact proud of, touching on a lot of different things about all this stuff, trying to do everything I can to call them back to the better angels of their nature. Yeah, I have a love for these people. It's not entirely rational, but maybe it is rational. I had a relationship with them, and I have neighbors of them, and I'm also a people lover at some level, and I would feel so gratified if we could get to the America at the end of It's a Wonderful Life, where what you've got is a community of people who aren't siding with Potter anymore. Well, I mean, they never did in that movie. Yeah, the greed is not going to rule the shaping of that society, which indeed is very much part of what's at stake in this America. It's not just fascism that we're dealing with here. There is a force of fascism that you can see operating, and it is bound like Siamese twins to a form of plutocracy. It is the rule of the big money power, which has been taking, it gets a $2 trillion tax cut that it doesn't need or deserve at the expense of average Americans from this Republican Party. It sides with the fossil fuel companies that want to keep their short-term profits good, and paralyzes us from doing what we need to do for the good of our of life on Earth, but and more particularly our children and grandchildren. It gets a Supreme Court that will hand power to the plutocracy through a deeply flawed decision in Citizens United, opening the floodgates to the money power. It's just all over the place that we're up against a plutocracy and a fascistic force, and the two have made common cause. And all these places where all this happens, it requires people to turn off an intelligence I know they've got. I mean, any kind of intelligence that I can envision respecting would, first of all, know what all the, like what percentage of the climate scientists would sign on to a statement and a warning that of a certain big exclamation point, cry from the heart that they've been putting out as a profession. If you're intelligent, you know how science works, and you understand that this is a historically important moment. We've got a field of science that's issuing a warning. I don't think there's anything like this in the history of science. maybe there would be again if the astronomers tell us there's this huge asteroid that's going to hit us dead on if we don't do something about it. But other than that, we've had the pandemic, but climate change is looking big, and you would think that if the issue of climate change has been out there since even before the Rio conference of 1992, that anybody with intelligence would realize that the scientists are the people to be listening to. These are scientific questions. What's happening to the climate? It's a scientific question. The scientists. So who are you going to listen to? These political leaders? These people who have been hired by for disinformation purposes by the fossil fuel industry? It's not hard to trace the money. A couple of books have been written about it. What kind of intelligence is it that doesn't say, "Oh, well, my political party has been saying about climate change all kinds of things to keep us from taking it seriously is something that we need to take action for because we love our children or grandchildren or because we respect life on Earth, the biosphere, whatever. Because we are good stewards and we're not going to needlessly trigger an excessive wave of extinctions if it's in our power reasonably to prevent it. We're good people. So what do you think about a party that basically keeps on contradicting the scientists on a scientific question? And especially then when you can look at, if we acted responsibly, that wouldn't be in the short-term financial interests of this greedy, very powerful industry, the fossil fuel industry. Oh, it's easy to see what's going on here. I mean, how smart do you have to be to see what the hell's going on here? I've had, I debated this issue back in the 90s against a local Republican on TV out of Harrisonburg, Virginia. I've seen it argued that, the scientists are only saying this because money's corrupted them. This is a way for them to get their big grants from foundations. I mean, if you look at all the grants that are given to people like climate scientists, worldwide, and you added them all up, $1 million here, and a few $1 million there, and some hundreds of thousands of these people, and then you compare that with if money's going to buy what it is that we believe. Compare what the financial interests of the scientists, who aren't particularly organized to put financial interests first, compared to the financial interests of the richest industry in the history of the world, the fossil fuel industry. Oh, and they are part of a system in which the idea that greed is good, that self-interest is built into the market system, that Adam Smith has argued, the capitalist ideology, that we're led by an invisible hand. So there's really permission for corporations to act without thinking about where's the big world heading. They're authorized to act in whatever way best serves the fiduciary interests of their stockholders. Greed is basically the fuel that the market ideology depends on. We don't appeal to the butcher and the baker, Adam Smith wrote, based on their altruism, but on their self-interest. Self-interest is okay. So who are you going to believe? Well, how do you get intelligent people to believe what's obviously going on here? To believe contrary to what's obviously going on. The Republican Party and probably substantial chunks of the Democratic Party have been bought by the fossil fuel industry that acts on the basis of greed because it has permission to do so, and because it's the fruit of a system that has a dynamic of its own, which I develop in my book, Critiquing the Market System, as having certain tendencies that need to be corrected, though I love the market. So intelligent people don't draw the obvious conclusion. Again, we're right back to where we were before. What happened to them that they can give support to that they can believe what are obviously lies? A large proportion of the Republicans live among, inferring from a lot of data about polls in various places. I can assume that the overwhelming majority of the people among whom I live in this county, in this Shenandoah Valley, believe that the election was stolen from Donald Trump. And they believe that he did nothing wrong, and these are the political prosecution and stuff. According to the polls, like 2/3, 3/4. If you pay any attention to any of these things, you wouldn't believe those things. And I've never really felt completely settled that they actually do believe it. I don't know if they knowingly sort of pretend to believe these things because there's something more fundamental going on in terms of their allegiance than belief. I mean, I put out these things about, the truth as I see it, trying to show them, no, don't believe these things, believe the truth and draw the conclusions and change sides. But if it doesn't matter what they believe, if they actually know better, I'm just puzzled. But in any event, we have a job to do as a society that we can't be healthy until a lot of the people who are aligning themselves with whatever that force is that's doing this on climate change, doing this, attacking the rule of law, doing this in undermining our basic democratic structures and overturning elections. We can't be hungry. We can't be healthy as a democratic society if we've got tens of millions of people who somehow, in spite of their intelligence, say they believe these things, and in spite of showing their goodness in a lot of ways, are aligning themselves with something which is just plain old destructive. How do we bring them back? I would like to see everybody who's in a position to ask themselves that question. Well, anywhere from, I don't know what the answer is. I just do what I know how to do. But, how do we deal with our neighbors in the context of this need that eventually we need good people on the side of the good, otherwise the teeter-totter. With so many good people on the wrong side, the teeter-totter ends up that power in our society is being wielded by a destructive force. So I would like to see everybody who's in any position to do things that are that will move anything in that world in the right direction, in the direction of their bringing their goodness, their peace on earth, and their goodwill toward men set of values into how they conduct themselves and who they support, which includes who they support in their political lives, because that's where power gets determined. And we don't want the force of brokenness to have the power to be at the helm of the United States. Like I was talking with my friend Scott Loomis early in our conversation earlier about where is the international order heading, that this election that's coming up, basically, there are a lot of ways of talking about what's at stake, but in the context of international order, what's at stake is whether America will, past this election after next inauguration day, have some legitimate claim to be playing the role of leader of the free world, which I think is something that we've played even while we've had our grave sins here and there. The world would be a lot bigger mess than it would have been if, say, from the age of from Roosevelt's taking office in 1933 to let's say the first Bush. No, I'll go further. Um, uh, the second Bush becomes problematic, but all the way through till Trump, there have been important ways in which the United States played the role of leader of the free world, and the world would be a bigger mess if it hadn't been for the United States playing that role in World War II, in the Cold War, and and so on. So part of the choice that we make is whether or not that role that American patriots felt was a very important part of what we believed in as Americans. And then we've got the other choice, which is what direction will the world go in if we elect a different president who's given, both in his first term and in lots of things he's said since, will turn the United States, both domestically and in our global role, into something very different from leader of the free world. In a sense, switching sides in an ancient battle. This is, in a sense, though I don't really understand what's happened, say, since, say, the 1990s. There was this guy, Fukuyama, wrote a very famous, when the Cold War was over, he wrote this famous essay, The End of History. Basically, liberal democracy had won. Things were over, basically. We were not going to, it had been settled what kind of societies the world was going to consist of. Liberal democracies. I was dubious about that then, but my critique of it aside, it did seem like liberal democracies were pretty good at perpetuating themselves. We've been doing it pretty well in the United States, for a very long time with some hiccups, and in Western Europe and all that. There was a victory of then in the Cold War also of democracy. We were able to defend ourselves, and we were able to advance into the civilized world more and more. We'd made the world safe, not only safe for democracy, but we'd resolved the question about whether the totalitarian and the fascistic communistic totalitarian regimes would control the human future. That was really supposed to be a settled thing. And clearly that it's not. And I don't fully understand why we weren't able to maintain the territory that we had captured. I mean, even Russia was moving in the direction of democracy, as well as the Eastern European countries that the Soviets had held as vassals, in a way that we hadn't done the same to our allies. Much more voluntary, less coercive. We never had the equivalent of American tanks rolling into some European capital the way the Soviet tanks rolled into Prague in 1968. That was the same conflict in some ways, and is part of what we are having to deal with, both in the American sphere and also at the global sphere. Even if we manage to keep the United States from falling into the category on the fascist side, we're still going to have to be dealing with the fact that fascism has been gaining ground around the world. So a lot of countries are less democratic than they were. Freedom House, I think, goes back to 2006. But if you count Russia, it's over 20 years now that important ground has been lost by you. And one of the battlefields for us Americans, what we decide has a lot to do with how the forces of on the better side are going to do, because our European traditional friends are scared about what happens if America goes over to the other side. They didn't used to have to worry about that, but now they do. They're dependent on us for some things, and they're trying to make provision for the possibility that the United States will not be there with its military might and its global leadership to help the creation of the better world that they also aspire to. And one of the places where this is going to be fought out, and it's not going to be over after this election, has got to do with what's happened to the Republican Party, from the level of a lot of tens of millions of voters, a big chunk of the electorate that includes a lot of intelligent and good people, not confined to intelligent and good people, mind you, but a lot of them have been swept up into this. And it includes a Republican Party that makes choices in which integrity gets consistently punished, and selling out to a human monster, basically, that's taken over the party, is predominant in the party. And so even after we get through, if we get past Trump's threat, and the election probably won't end that, regardless of who wins. I mean, we've seen what he does when he loses. But eventually he's going to disappear from the scene. And it behooves us Americans to want to have two major political parties that are basically more aligned with doing good things in the world, and not having a political party that's somehow been taken over to a great extent by something that's just destructive, spreads a pattern of brokenness, feeds on people's brokenness, makes people feel more anger and hatred than love, and more cruelty than kindness in the political realm, that supports power in an ugly form. That political party has shown itself to be something that would transform a lot of good people into unwitting channels of a destructive force. And then there's also, as I've been saying, the need to heal, to transform, for some kind of better angels of our nature, so that my good Christian neighbors bring a good Christian spirit into the political realm as their lead card. Not that we don't sometimes, it's not beanbag, and we don't sometimes have to, get embattled, but we're always looking for, can we make peace rather than conflict work, and goodwill toward men rather than hatred and antagonism. So that's the battle we're engaged in at all kinds of levels. I'm going to conclude this with by shifting gears. I claim that the best way of understanding even the battles that I'm talking about between force of brokenness and a force of wholeness are best understood in an evolutionary perspective. That I claim to prove that this kind of force that we're dealing with is an inevitable result of what our species did when we took an unprecedented step out of the order that evolved through biological processes for 3.5 billion years. And then we step out of that order by becoming the first creatures to invent our own way of life. I claim that I can show that unleashes a force, the one where you need to bring under control for American democracy to survive, but even bigger for human civilization to survive rather than destroy itself. But the other place where the evolutionary perspective, I think, needs to be expanded so that the secular worldview builds on the Darwinian insight about how life developed. Not just in the way of that book back there, The Parable of the Tribes, about the evolution of civilization, the destructive force that inevitably arises independently of the nature of the creature, but also looked into how biological evolution works when it creates the nature of that creature. That there are important implications of looking at what evolution put into us, in particular in the experiential realm. And I have on my website, which is betterhumanstory.org, a half dozen explorations of this kind that I think I can show that there are experiential tendencies that were selected for as we developed as a species, and that were selected for because they motivated us to do, and our ancestors to do the things that help them get their DNA into the future. And biological evolution that's the name of the game. Can you get your DNA into the future indefinitely? And if something gets selected for, meaning that more of these people get their DNA into the future who have got this experiential tendency, then these people who don't have that experiential tendency, you end up with people who have what we've got, these experiential tendencies, because it motivated them to behave in ways that made them more successful at the game of biological evolution, getting their DNA into the future. This isn't, I'm going to read you one of these because if you look around, like on my YouTube channel, you'll see that I have dealt with the whole question of value. I've dealt with the whole spiritual dimension. I've dealt with the question of why do we get pleasure from beauty. It's really neat stuff that evidence and logic leads us to flesh out some stuff that the secular worldview hasn't done yet, that tells us some important things that the current secular worldview fails to tell us. So that there are some important things that people of a religious point of view used to know and understand about morality and spiritual dimension, I might say, and for example, that people with a secular worldview don't know and don't understand with bad consequences, but can know and can understand because there's a completely legitimate way of getting there, just using evidence and reason like the way we're supposed to do in the secular worldview. We don't just take a sacred text and say, this is the inerrant word of God. We say, show me the evidence from which I should draw that conclusion. Now, this is one of my pieces along that line. Not as important, I don't think, as the value in the spiritual one, because those are things I point to because I think that honoring those inborn tendencies that are there because they're life-serving will empower us to do what we need to do so that the experiment of human civilization on this planet becomes less destructive, more likely to survive for the long haul, less likely to destroy itself by the means by which we could blow this whole thing. But this is nonetheless, I hope, interesting because it's about the question of finding the world interesting. And the title I gave it when I published it as an op-ed, and by the way, I didn't see this as a message to my conservative neighbors. I have this strong impulse to put out some of the other things now and then, and I indulge that impulse when I need to. I've got a couple of pieces going now that is not going to help get conservatives to vote against fascism and help preserve American democracy. Not even close. But it does say something which pertains to the bigger picture of how we should understand ourselves and the story of our species. And my big mission in life is really at that level about there's stuff that happened to our species that we can see through an evolutionary perspective that'll put some very important things in a significantly different light, including how we understand ourselves, how we understand why our history's been as ugly as it's been, and how we understand what the nature of the challenges that we face that are an inevitable consequence of being the civilization creating species. So those are the things that I also put out these pieces and hope that some people will say, what else has this guy got to say? So what's interesting? I've been thinking about finding the world interesting or not. The subject is interesting to me because finding things interesting is one of my stronger events in the decathlon of living meaningfully. Excuse me. I've asked myself, what interesting things can be said about finding the world interesting? Here's what I've come up with. We humans have available to us a variety of ways of experiencing our lives positively. That is, ways of feeling glad to be alive, like three bullet points. Feeling the positive bonds of love and affection. Satisfying our appetites for food, for sex, etc. Taking pleasure in the beauty in our world. Finding interesting belongs on that list. One feels better, more alive, when we find things interesting than when everything seems dull and boring. We prefer finding it meaningful to observe and investigate what we encounter in our reality. The evolutionary perspective, which tells us that we've been wired to experience positively those things that have been life-serving, enables us, because it motivates us to get those experiences, enables us readily to understand why finding things interesting would be crafted into our nature. What we experience positively is rewarding internally, so that we will seek out such experience. And the drive to seek out such experience has been instilled into our nature because it has helped our ancestors, those who passed their genetic endowment down to us, to survive in the external world. Such survival value is clear when it comes to motivating us to eat when we are hungry, or to form positive bonds with those around us, or to conceive the next generation of our kind. All those motivations increase the probability of our ancestors in succeeding in passing along to us their genetic design, and in turn will increase the likelihood of our passing our own design to our descendants. Likewise, with finding interesting things, the positive experience of being interested provides the motivation for a creature to learn more about the world in which it must survive. The more accurate the maps, that is, the better the understanding, the greater the creature's ability to operate successfully in its encompassing reality. The notion that finding things interesting has been crafted into our nature, that is, evolutionarily selected for, is suggested strongly by the almost universal tendency of very young humans to be animated by a powerful curiosity. Our species isn't the only one whose young show such curiosity. We see it in kittens. We see it in puppies, and among many others. Likely in every species in which learning about the world is an important part of their survival strategy. But our species, which is generally observed to have preserved juvenile traits, a phenomenon called neoteny, seems naturally to maintain a high degree of curiosity throughout our lives. In that context, it is troubling how widespread is the observation that a great many of our children lose that native curiosity midway through elementary school. Too much of our way of educating our young kills curiosity. And that strikes me as exemplifying how the task of fitting into civilization often suppresses our nature, training us away from paths that lead to more meaningful experience. This is one of the core things about the parable of the tribes, which is that there's been a selection, inevitably, a selection for societies that don't want us to be all that we were born to be. Some of that they encourage, and some of that they make war against, because they've been selected to meet other demands than the demand of people to get their needs met. And that's been a hardship for us, civilization creating species. And that's a big, big topic that I deal with in my book, Out of Weakness, Healing the Wounds That Drive Us to War. That we've been put into a very difficult situation, not because we imagine that inventing our own way of life, inventing ourselves onto the path of civilization and extricating ourselves. We didn't envision, the force that we were inevitably going to unleash. So talking about how our schools often kill the love of learning, I don't think I'm going out on too much of a lefty wing to declare that. I think kids are naturally curious, and my kids are, at a certain age when they're already, becoming human in their curiosity by asking questions like why. I think the process of inquiry continues in a healthy human being in a lifelong kind of a way, if it's not stifled. Now, it may be that people naturally become somewhat less curious than they were we're born into a cultural world that we've got to absorb a whole lot. Not just like kittens and puppies, but we got to learn a language, and there's all kinds of stuff that we got to do because we're the cultural animals. So I can imagine that as children, we're going to be really highly motivated to figure out what's going on and why things are the way they are and how things work and stuff like that. And eventually we'll probably settle into a less omnidirectional curiosity, but still pay real attention to the world that we've come to learn is a world that we will find it rewarding and maybe very adaptive to keep our eye on. So moving right along from the throwing in that little bit of social critique about civilization not being entirely something that we're in control of. Our inherent experiential tendencies, along with their resultant motivational tendencies and the behavioral tendencies those motivations lead to, are there because they have been life-serving in our ancestral past. And in that idea lies a means to correct an important defect in much of today's secular worldview. A major part of that worldview has given the experiential dimension short shrift. And we're talking about the secular worldview here. That disrespect is a result of the belief that reality is confined to the objective realm, the world out there, while what is experienced is merely subjective. So a major current in the secular worldview has consigned to second-class status some important realities that are necessarily rooted in experience. And by the way, you might, if you're interested in going deep into that issue, there is on my website, A Better Human Story. There's a piece that under a fateful step that goes into those important realities that we contact through the experiential realm. So I think if you search through experiential realm, you'll find it readily. But anyway, just laying it out. Important realities necessarily rooted in experience, not merely subjective. The evolutionary perspective should lead us to a different conclusion than that second-class thing about merely subjective and a matter of opinion and stuff like that on issues about values and spiritual truths. Our inherent spiritual tendencies point to a reality that is important because it has proved life-serving, proved by the fact that it's been selected for and is part of us. There are two important ways that it is a fundamental error to downgrade the experiential realm as merely subjective. First, because what has been selected for in our inborn experiential tendencies is a kind of projection of the external world in which we must survive, those tendencies are not arbitrary. They are a part of the structure of life, just as much in their way as our anatomy that's been selected for. But second, beyond that, it is only in the quality of a creature's internal experience that any kind of value can have meaning. This applies fully to that kind of value called interestingness. Boy, that idea about value having to be rooted in experience, I think is a really big one. I keep on harping on it. I don't feel like I've hit the ball out of the park, but it's true. We should honor the experiential realm because that's where value has emerged in the history of the cosmos. This applies fully to that kind of value called interestingness, which is one of the paths to which we are inherently drawn. Nothing could ever be objectively interesting. The objective qualities of things, whether they're complex or not, or reveal patterns or not, or explaining what's going on or not, or bear upon what our future will be or not, could never suffice to make something interesting. Interestingness must register in someone's experiential realm. So also with our experiencing some things as better and some as worse. If there were no creatures whose experience had an evaluative dimension, how could anything matter? But on the foundation of such evaluative experiences, better and worse, a moral dimension can be built that is real, important, and life-serving, not in the least deserving of second-class status. Here I'm just asserting that. I lay it out, I think, in a way that I don't think has any holes in it, in the writings and in other, but anyway, I hope it's enough to be at least plausible. At the root of the nature of sentient creatures like us, crafted to perpetuate our form of life, is an orientation to seek out positive experience. Happiness is an umbrella term for the various forms of positive experience, like love, pleasure, physical movement, spirituality, beauty, meaningful purpose, and finding things interesting. To make out all those realms of positive experience, to make them available to us humans. Which means that the pursuit of happiness is not only a right, it is an inborn assignment. And in that portal on my website, abetterhumanstory.org, there is a piece. Let's see if I can get to that piece. I think that last line becomes the title of another op-ed piece. The pursuit of happiness, more than a right. The evolutionary perspective tells us something about connection between happiness, the good, and life, and what's life-serving. Well, that's going to do it for me for today. I appreciate anybody who's followed the train along this track for as long as we've been doing this. If you heard some of it and you thought, well, I'd like to hear more of it, on YouTube I've made what feel to me like I've spilled my heart and soul through spilling my mind in a whole variety of discussions of what's at stake in our world today and how to understand our situation today and how we might align ourselves with the good in a battle that's going on in the middle of the American polity and also in the dynamics of human civilization, which may or may not make it past the next few generations. So go to my become a follower if you're so moved. And if you haven't already, send links to my stuff to people you know who might find understanding things in ways like this something they're interested in looking into. And then the writings, which is the thing that I've actually spent over, 60 years developing as my craft, laying out some of these ideas that I think hold water and could be of use to us in preserving what's good in this world. And American democracy is better than American fascism would be. And human civilization getting its act together is better than our destroying ourselves. And there are legitimate, valid, truthful statements about those two better thans that I just gave. And we're going to be fortified for that battle if we are able to plug into our moral and spiritual, inborn, experiential tendencies. And to be inspired by the knowledge that we are, in fact, better creatures than we have been taught that we are. One of my main lines is, the ugliness we see in human history is not human nature writ large. If you don't like that phrase, the ugliness we see in human history is not a clear picture of what we are by nature. And I can show that. So, abetterhumanstory.org. Bye-bye. I'll be back.